Hello everyone, welcome to my May 2019 haul video. Welcome back everyone to another brand new haul video. This is for May of 2019. For those of you not familiar with this series of videos I do here on my channel, it is essentially what the title of the video suggests. I do a haul of all the things I picked up in a specific month. This happens to be May of 2019. And without further ado, let's get into all of the things I picked up, because there's quite a few things that I got in May. First up, let's start with all of the comic book related items I picked up. Some of these are from Free Comic Book Day, some of these are things I picked up myself. Starting up here, the first thing is Firefly number 4, which is put out by Boom Studios now. I've said this many times. Firefly, as well as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, was at Dark Horse for the longest time. Now the licenses have been bought up by Boom Studios, and they've been putting out their comic books now. And this is issue number 4, and I think there's 6 or 7 of these out now, and I've got to track down the rest, but they're kind of a little tougher to find than some of the other more mainstream comic books, but I'll track them down eventually. And next up here, speaking of mainstream, is Supergirl number 30, but it is the variant cover. For some reason, my local comic book stores don't stock very many issues of Supergirl with the regular cover, and sometimes I get there too late and all they have left are the variant covers, which I don't necessarily mind, but sometimes my obsessive compulsive disorder can kick in and I've got to find myself all the regular covers. I will try to track down a regular cover of this pretty soon, but I gotta do some looking around for it first. Next up here is Shazam number 5. This is the new Shazam series that's been coming out now for the last several months, really to kind of boost awareness of the character for the movie that came out a little while ago, and I've been reading it right along. It's a really nice, good series. I do recommend it. If you're a fan of the character of Shazam, or if you don't really know anything about Shazam at all, give it a read as well. The next several things I'm going to show you are things that were actually given to me by a friend of mine who picked up a few extra copies of things on Free Comic Book Day, as well as having one extra copy of this comic book here. And this is True Believers number 1 of the Fantastic Four, which is of the storyline of the Skrulls. The Skrulls now have been introduced in the MCU, so if you are familiar with them in the MCU, they can actually kind of get their start, I believe, in the Fantastic Four world. So definitely give these old comic books a read. These True Believer ones are very interesting because they kind of just give you a taste or a hint of some of these old, really classic comic books. Next up here is a free comic book of The Tick. And The Tick is something that I've been aware of ever since I was a child, when they had the animated series back in the 90s, I believe. And they've recently revived The Tick on Amazon with a series that unfortunately only ran 2 seasons and was unceremoniously canceled recently, which is a real shame because The Tick is a very unique take on the superhero genre, and I really want to get my hands on a lot of the old Tick comics, as well as a lot of the old animated series, as well as the old live-action series that I think a lot of people don't know about, where the Tick was portrayed by Patrick Warburton. So next up here is a Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Firefly kind of dual comic. I believe this is kind of just like a sampler to kind of like get you interested in both Buffy and Firefly. Yet again, something put out by Boom Studios. Next up here is something that is also from Free Comic Book Day, but it's something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I'm going to do a video on this subject someday. And that is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There is a long-running series of comic books put out by IDW of the Turtles that's been going on for years now, and I really need to add them to my collection. I started collecting them individually when they first came out many, many years ago, and I just couldn't keep up, obviously. So I gotta get my hands on some of the hardcover trades that they have, because they're really nice. Next up here, Free Comic Book Day edition of Deadly Class. Unfortunately, this is also a comic book series that got adapted into a TV series that was unceremoniously canceled. But as opposed to The Tick, which got 2 seasons on Amazon, Deadly Class only got 1 season on Sci-Fi. Next up are a bunch of books that I got during the month of May. These were once again all gifted by me by that same friend. Essentially, he had a bunch of books that he didn't have room for at his home, and he asked me if I would look through them and see which ones I wanted. And of course, I can't turn down free books, you know, you just can't do things like that. So most of these are things I'm actually not even remotely familiar with at all, but I thought I would just take a chance on them because, hey, the free price tag is ever alluring. First up here is actually something I'm a little familiar with. I'm least familiar with the author, and this is a novel, I believe, done by Greg Rucka, who is a comic book writer, so I'm aware of him, and this is Bravo. Next up here, I believe, is a biography on Marlon Brando by Patricia Bosworth. Marlon Brando is one of my favorite actors of all time, so I couldn't very well turn this down. Next up here are a series of plays. There's 4 plays here, one of which I'm familiar with and the other 3 I'm not. First up here is Dinner with My Friends. Next up here is The Last Night of Ballyhoo. And next is The Lights. The last one here I believe I'm familiar with because this was turned into a film at one point starring Jean Arthur and I believe Jimmy Stewart, and that is You Can't Take It With You. At least I'm hoping that the film is based on this play, or else I'm completely lying to you. Next up here is a book of complete works by Arthur Rimbaud, who is someone I am not familiar with, but he, I believe, is a poet. And yeah, this is his complete works. Next up here is an author I am familiar with, but I have none of his work, and I've never read any of his work, and this is Christopher Moore's Blood-Sucking Fiends, a love story. And next up here is something I'm definitely familiar with, and this is the book titled You're Never Weird on the Internet, Almost, by Felicia Day. I'm pretty sure many people are familiar with who Felicia Day is. If you're not, look her up because she's kind of a cool person. Next up here is a book about Jean-Luc Godard, and it's called Everything is Cinema, The Working Life of Jean-Luc Godard. I know many people are not fans of Jean-Luc Godard. I'll say I'm a bit more fan of his work versus him as a person, and even his work leaves a little room for questioning. So this was something that I just found to be very interesting. I just love getting books about filmmakers in general, so when I saw this one, I was like, oh, I'll take it. And last, but certainly not least, is something I think many of you are probably familiar with, I know I am, and that is Orange is the New Black, which is, I believe, the inspiration for the big hit Netflix television series. And for the finale, these are all the Blu-rays, UHDs, and DVDs that I picked up in the month of May. First up here is the 4K Ultra HD edition of How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, but it is the Best Buy exclusive Steelbook edition. I made sure to get this because I have all of the other How to Train Your Dragon films in the Best Buy exclusive Steelbook editions. Next up here is one of my favorite films from last year, and this is the film by the great Barry Jenkins, If Beale Street Could Talk. This is an astonishing film, a beautiful film. Barry Jenkins is really one of the best directors working today. Next up here is actually a surprise hit from this year, and this is a film that I really enjoyed, and that is Fighting with My Family. Next up here is a Godzilla film, and this is Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, or Ibira Horror of the Deep is the other title of this film. And these next 2 films were actual also gifts to me from that same friend who seems to just give me a lot of things that he either doesn't have room for or things that I would like. Yeah, he's a pretty great guy. First up here is the Luc Besson film Lucy, starring Scarlett Johansson from a few years ago. And I remember this film when it came out was a surprising international hit. And next up here is a classic film. It's also a Best Picture winner, and that is Cavalcade. And next up here is Disney's Hercules. I was able to actually buy this on eBay, and the reason why I'm picking up a lot of these older Disney films on eBay is because I am one of those people who really like slipcovers, and for some reason the Disney slipcovers can sometimes be the hardest to find, because once they're no longer found in stores, it's really hard to track them down. Next up here is the 4K Ultra HD edition of Captain America the First Avenger, and this is an upgrade over the Blu-ray which I've had for many years, and they're starting to put out all of the MCU films now in the 4K Ultra HD editions. I think by the end of this year we're pretty much going to have all of them. I think they just announced all of the Iron Man films as well as a couple of the Thor films that they needed to release, and following that of course is Captain America the Winter Soldier, which is one of my favorite films in the MCU, and this is of course the Ultra HD 4K edition, and it is a nice upgrade to the Blu-ray that I already have. And finally, here is actually coincidentally another upgrade from a Blu-ray I already have, but this is a much needed upgrade because if memory serves correctly, the Blu-ray didn't carry over a lot of the special features that a 3-disc DVD edition has, and that is Black Hawk Down, directed by Ridley Scott. This film, I remember when it came out, was a really big hit, and I'm really glad to finally own it in a really good edition, because I hear this looks particularly fantastic. And if you know Ridley Scott, his films have a really great aesthetic to them. They may not all necessarily be the best film when it comes to story and things like that, but they always look fantastic, and they're always well put together from a technical standpoint. So that has been my haul for May of 2019. June is my birthday month, so hopefully I'll be getting a bunch of cool things in honor of my birthday this year. Also, if you want to see any of these things in any more depth, please let me know. And if you like this video, please check out the other videos on my channel.